What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Many have queried who would win in an all-out conflict between the Borg and the Dominion. So far, all attempts have reached a stalemate between those who dare to debate. In this video, I hope to lay to rest this question with a final answer. On Stardate 51721.3, or for those uninitiated, the events of this battle would take place between Star Trek First Contact and Star Trek Insurrection. Starfleet and the Federation are at loss of ideas and are running dry on tactics in regard to defeating the Dominion. Starfleet Tactical would send out a fleet-wide communication to all starship commanders with combat experience. They are to come up with any and all field-proven strategies and ideas regardless how out of the box they are. Starfleet will receive a plethora of strategies ranging from deceiving the Romulan Empire into joining forces with the Federation, to the relocation of the Baku from the Briar Patch in order to harness the metaphasic radiation to treat and rejuvenate the casualties of this war. Of course, it would take only one famed captain commanding the flagship of the Federation to devise a plan that would kill two birds with one stone. This plan would involve the construction of an interplexing beacon which, when ready, would be deployed in the Gamma Quadrant via the Bajoran wormhole by a cloaked ship deep within Dominion territory. Once deployed, Starfleet would mine the entrance to the wormhole on their own side in the Alpha Quadrant with self-replicating mines capable of cloaking, making any escape for the Dominion forces through the wormhole impossible. It wouldn't be too long when the Borg would receive the signal and send a single cube to the Gamma Quadrant utilizing a transwarp hub. Once the cube arrived, it would begin tracing the signal to its point of origin, whilst assimilating any planet outpost the cube would encounter along its path, and before too long, would engage a Dominion patrol. But before we go any further, let's break down these two forces, starting with the Dominion. The Dominion is a coalition, a confederation, a collection of planets and star systems which have been conquered and forced into subjugation to the Founders through their militant arm known only as the Jem'Hadar. The Jem'Hadar are a genetically engineered race with the specific purpose of being the strong arm of the Dominion, a race of clones that grow to full maturity within a couple of days. Programmed from birth to worship the Founders, even though most have never seen one or know what they look like. For the Founders, however, worship wasn't enough, and demanded loyalty, especially from the Jem'Hadar, and so to ensure this, the Jem'Hadar are designed to require a substance known only as the White. Ketracel White is a substance that keeps the Jem'Hadar working at optimal efficiency, providing them with all the nutrients they need, and is also highly addicted to them. It's also important to understand that the White completes their genetic makeup, and it is why without it, they would die. Well, except for this guy. The strengths of the Jem'Hadar are known to be hyper-aggression, their ability to turn invisible, and this is known as shrouding, hyper-strength, and they're also highly trained combat operators. Their weaknesses lie, of course, with their reliance on the White, their unwavering blind loyalty to the Founders, and they are also limited by their genetic conditioning. The weapons generally utilized by the Jem'Hadar are both plasma rifles and pistols, the Cartaken shot blade, and combat knives. It's also important to know that to maintain cohesion amongst the ranks of the Jem'Hadar, each one takes the orders from one known as the First. This particular soldier would be the equivalent of a high-ranking non-com. This Jem'Hadar would take his orders from another species whom are responsible for issuing the White. They are called the Vorta. The Vorta were once a primitive race with limited intelligence and a pacifistic nature, whose diet consisted of nothing more than nuts and berries. They were rewarded greatly after healing a sick changeling. Through genetic manipulation, they were granted increased intelligence and the ability to defend themselves by projecting an energy blast from their bodies. They were also granted a high standing within the Dominion, second only to the founders themselves. However, these rewards came at a great cost, especially where the genetic manipulation to their being is concerned. For just like the Jem'Hadar, the Vorta were also reduced to a race of clones with a limited lifespan and implanted with a suicide device that will activate at either the behest of the founder, if a Vorta individual has been captured, or they have reached the end of their determined lifespan, after which the same model will be cloned. So far, only 4 known to exist. The Vorta's strengths lie in the fact that they are highly intelligent and manipulative. They have masters of the power of suggestion and capable of releasing an energy blast from their bodies. Their weaknesses lie in their pacifistic nature, limited lifespan, they are somewhat treasonous on occasion, and of course their blind devotion to the founders, who are at the very top of the hierarchy in the Dominion. The founders are highly intelligent and with the ability to shapeshift, that when they take whatever form they have chosen, the changes don't just mimic the form, they become that thing. This characteristic also allows multiple changelings to bond together to form what is called the Great Link. This link allows the changelings to bond together, sharing their thoughts and feelings with one another. The founders are considered a myth by many races under the rule of the Dominion, and although many have benefited under their tyranny, those who refuse to surrender to them will end up with the privilege of a multi-generational virus called the Blight, for which there is no cure. The strengths of the founders lie in their ability to shapeshift, which also allows them to form the Great Link. They have superior strength to that of an average human or humanoid. They are master strategists, masters of infiltration and subversion, and master geneticists. Their weaknesses, however, lie in the fact that they are highly xenophobic and arrogant. They are also highly susceptible to energy discharges, and after a certain period of time they must regenerate by returning to their gelatinous state, which, should they ever be caught off guard, they will be highly vulnerable. And now we meet the species so terrifying that their mere mention would freeze the soul of anyone who would hear their name. I'm speaking only, of course, of the Borg. The Borg are a cybernetic collective comprised of billions of drones from thousands of species across thousands of worlds. The collective in its entirety is controlled by a single conscience. The thoughts, knowledge and memories are preserved by the collective so that in the event of the destruction of a drone or multiple drones, their essence remains. Typically, the Borg would ignore any intrusions to the cube unless intruders were considered a threat. The same rule was also applied when encountering other ships, lest the Borg deem them worthy of study, or even assimilation. There are 2 types of assimilation, what I call Phase 1 and Phase 2. The Phase 1, when infiltrating a ship or a planet, the Borg will utilize nanoprobes via nanotubules, capable of penetrating almost any dermal layer, releasing nanoprobes into the bloodstream of their victim, which in turn will begin to physically alter the new drone and connecting them to the hive mind. And Phase 2, once the population of a world or a crew of a ship have undergone Phase 1 assimilation, these new drones would undergo physical surgeries and be augmented with cybernetic implants. The strengths of the Borg lie with assimilation, that they are highly adaptable to almost all attacks, the collective hive mind, their ability to regenerate, and of course their cybernetic enhancements. Their weaknesses, well, they are very few. Their biological components, and that they are limited by their assimilated knowledge. As mentioned earlier, once the cube arrived, it would begin tracing the signal back to its point of origin. Whilst assimilating any planet or outpost the cube would encounter along its path, and before too long would engage a Dominion patrol. The 3 patrol ships would warn the cube not to intrude into their space any further or suffer the wrath of the Dominion. Ignoring the warning, the cube would begin scans of the 3 ships and deem the life forms unworthy for assimilation, however would take great interest in the weapon systems and technology. A single drone would beam aboard the lead vessel and begin analysing the computer core. Interpreting this as an act of aggression, the first would order the intruder killed. Once done, the three ships would break formation and attack the cube from multiple sides, believing the Borg would have to pull off a multiple switch-fire maneuvers. Unfortunately for the Dominion ships, the cube is exactly the same on every side, utilizing shield-draining tractor beams, cutting lasers, and power-draining energy blasts. Armed with phased polaron beams and torpedoes, the cube would receive a heavy barrage of intense weapons fire from the three attack vessels. Keeping in mind the weapon systems of the Jem'Hadar attack ships are capable of taking down a Galaxy-class ship, and that they would not stop attacking the Borg once a significant amount of damage was caused, allowing the Borg to adapt and regenerating the cube through their willpower. Rather, the three ships would continue firing until the cube was destroyed. For the Jem'Hadar, victory is life, and the Dominion as a whole would show no mercy. That is the order of things. The Borg within moments would attempt to capture the fighters with their tractor beams and use their cutting beam to destroy the attack ships. No doubt they would succeed in capturing two of the three and destroy them, where the third would power up its engines and ram the cube at full speed, destroying the cube beyond 75% mark, where at which the Borg cube is still very combat effective. Wondering what has happened to the patrol, it would not be long before the Dominion would send a small fleet to ascertain why they have gone missing, and why they haven't reported back to the Dominion. Upon arriving at the last known coordinates, they will find the wreckage of 4 ships and began examining the debris of the alien vessel. Well, I'm afraid that's all for part 1. Please tune in next weekend for part 2, where the two fleets will go toe to toe in a battle for dominance where victory is life and resistance is futile. Will the Dominion assert their order of things, or will the Borg bring order to chaos? Tune in next weekend. I hope you enjoyed this first part, and if you did, please hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you are already subscribed, then please share it as far and wide as you can, because it would really help my channel and I would appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Bye! After their last encounter with the Borg, the Dominion will retrieve and analyse any debris, including Borg drones from the enemy vessel. The Founders would not procrastinate in upgrading the Dominion technologies, be it either offensive or defensive. They would ramp up the production of Jem'Hadar soldiers, and most likely if they were able to retrieve drones from the wreckage of the Borg cube, the drones would be experimented on extensively, including being put through simulations to see how the drones would behave in certain scenarios via a neural stimulator. Founders would also have all the worlds within the Dominion involved in the production of new ships, more Jem'Hadar, and the creation of better technologies, turning the Dominion into a war machine. Meanwhile, in the Delta Quadrant, the Borg would realise that the resistance for the newly discovered enemy is far from futile. In order to find out why the cube that was sent to the Gamma Quadrant hasn't returned, the Borg Collective would once again decide to venture back to the Gamma Quadrant in an attempt to locate the origin of the signal sent by the intergalactic beacon. And this time, they're going force. This time 3 cubes would be sent. 2 in search of the missing ship, and the third would try to locate the origin of the signal. Once in the Gamma Quadrant, the 3 cubes would split up and begin their assignments. The Borg would not stop by nearby systems or planets for a simulation. Rather, this time they'll focus solely on their missions. The 2 cubes travelling at high warp would eventually find the last known location of their mission ship and begin scanning the debris. The Borg would analyse the residual weapon signatures and share the findings with the 3rd cube automatically to begin adaptations. The lone cube would make its way deep within Dominion space, following the signal back to the beacon. Once the cube would arrive at the beacon's location, it would analyse and determine that materials used in its construction would have a Federation signature. Learning this, the collective would decide to make their way back to the transwarp aperture to return to the Delta Quadrant. However, before they could achieve this, they would be set upon by a fleet of Dominion vessels ranging from Jem'Hadar fighters, battleships, battlecruisers, and the Karema starship. The fighters would make up the bulk of the fleet, however the battleships and cruisers would be carrying Jem'Hadar troops packed to the brim. It wouldn't surprise me that they'd even have troops stored in the transporter buffers. However, the Jem'Hadar wouldn't be fighting alone this time. This time, the Founders would be leading the battle, as the Vorta would coordinate the battle from the Karema starship. Now, I know what many of you may ask me. Well, wouldn't the collective know what happened to the cube since they're all part of the hive mind? Well, no. When a cube is sent to another part of the galaxy via transwarp hub, that even for the Borg there is a limit to their communication range from the rest of the collective and the Queen herself. It therefore falls upon the vinculum to process and organise the thoughts of the Borg in that particular cube and maintain order. The fighters would swarm the 3 cubes and unleash all their firepower onto them, while the battleships would make flybys beaming over as many troops as they could and avoid fire from the Borg, which would have some difficulty at first trying to lock onto the smaller craft, given that each side only utilises a tractor and cutting beam. Although they can fire energy blasts which can drain the shields of any ship, the sheer number of fighters that would be swarming the cube would allow the fighters to cover each other whilst distracting the Borg, or in the meantime the cruisers and battleships would unload untold amounts of Jem'Hadar and changeling into the cubes themselves. Once both parties were on board the cubes, immediately the Jem'Hadar would shroud and start killing Borg within their alcoves, as the changeling would revert to the gelatinous states and attempt to make their way into the internals of the ship. Operating in tandem, both groups would begin to cause large amounts of damage to the Borg, and although the Borg would have difficulties trying to adapt and ascertain where the attacks are coming from, as they are susceptible to certain forms of cloaking technologies, i.e. that utilised by the Hansen family? No, not them. The Borg would finally adapt to both the plasma weapons and the shrouds of the Jem'Hadar, making both their weapons and cloaking technologies useless. Given their enhanced strengths via the cybernetics, the Borg would begin retaliating and fight back. The Jem'Hadar would continue to fire their plasma weapons a few more times until they realised the weapons were no longer viable, and so they would begin hacking them to pieces with their Katarkin shock blades. Trying as they may to adapt to the weapons fire of the Jem'Hadar, they are also susceptible to bladed weapons. The battle would rage on for some time in each cube, as the genetic engineered soldiers were tearing to the cybernetic monstrosities, but likewise the Borg drones, although finding the Jem'Hadar unworthy of assimilation, would utilise their nanoprobes to at least slow down their attackers. Meanwhile, the changelings would make their way through every nook and cranny of the cube, destroying any piece of technology they would deem to be vital, including junction nodes and eventually the vinculum. And even though I doubt the changeling would know exactly what the vinculum is for, it would be obvious to anybody that it had some importance, and more importantly, would deal a significant blow to the drones of this cube. The changelings would attempt to destroy the vinculum, only for one of them to be killed by an energy discharge received by a Borg defense mechanism, as they would not leave this piece of equipment unprotected. After the attempt, several drones would beam in internally to the housing of the vinculum and try to prevent the rest of the changeling on each ship from destroying the vinculum. The drones would try to assimilate the changeling, however find this feat fruitless. As the battle would rage on between the Jem'Hadar and the Borg drones, the Karema starship from where the battle is being coordinated would detect the Borg cube's defences would be weakened as each drone is killed, one after another. The will of the Borg within these ships would begin to wane. This information would be relayed to each first of the Jem'Hadar battle group or section and order them to keep fighting just a little longer. It wouldn't be too long, of course, that when enough drones have been destroyed, the order for retreat would be given. As the Jem'Hadar and changelings would rendezvous at the transport sites with Borg drones in pursuit, finally the Dominion would utilise a weapon that is most dreaded by the Federation. Of course, I'm talking about Houdinis. Random explosions would begin to damage the cube as drones would pass certain sections of the ship as they pursued the Dominion troops to the evacuation points. Now, I know I didn't mention the Houdinis in part 1, but you see, that's the problem with Houdinis. They tend to appear when they're least expected, and when they do, well, it's too late to complain about them anyway. So moving on. As enough damage would be caused internally and the already weakened will of the Borg would significantly affect the cube's defences, the rest of the Dominion fleet would go all out on the 3 cubes. The Dominion would obliterate all 3 of the ships, and once again they would recover any and everything they could from the debris for further study. For although once again the Dominion have won this battle, the war is far from over. After the last engagement with the Borg, the Dominion have not only begun recouping their losses, but also began upgrading their weapons and ships with Borg technology, recovered from the debris of the 3 cubes, enhancing their offensive and defensive capabilities from shields to weapons, and even enhancing the Jem'Hadar. Once again, the Borg, still receiving the signal from the Gamma Quadrant, decide this time they will go all out. After losing 3 cubes and thousands of drones, which by comparison to the whole collective is a small loss, it would still be considered an unacceptable one. So this time, an entire Uni-complex would make its way to Dominion space, bringing with them the Queen, 1 Unimatrix command ship, and an ungodly amount of cubes. The Borg would set off using every transwarp hub and corridor at their disposal. Arriving at the outer rim of Dominion territory, they would begin assimilating the outer lying worlds, not to enhance the quality of life or bring them one step closer to perfection, but to diminish the Dominion's territory, and by doing so, weakening the Dominion. World after world will fall. The Dominion forces reacting to this attack upon their domain would try the tactics already tried and proven, which would become more difficult with each attempt and would inevitably become impossible. However, the Founders would order their forces to stand their ground and continue fighting. Even with the enhancements made to Dominion forces, the Borg would adapt to each attack. As more systems would fall to the Borg and the Dominion fleets would become stretched out, the worlds living under the tyranny of the Founders would either be conscripted into the fight to fill the gaps and hold off the Borg, others would attempt to flee from the Dominion space, many being assimilated by the Borg, and others would be destroyed by the Jem'Hadar as an example to others as what fate would befall them should they attempt to flee. Well, those who had the capability at least. The Founders would begin employing biogenic weapons into their arsenal, which isn't unheard of tactic within the Dominion, such as horrifying viruses like the Quickening or the Blight. As we know, the Borg are susceptible to attacks upon their biological components, and this is where the Dominion would focus their attacks. All the Dominion forces would slowly be pushed further back into their own territory, either day by day or week by week, and failing to recoup their losses as the Borg could assimilate faster than the Founders could reproduce Jem'Hadar soldiers. It wouldn't be too long before the worlds within their space whom were not warp capable would be brought into the fold. With promises of a suitable position within the Dominion hierarchy, these newcomers would take these offers and become part of the fighting force. Continuing to relentlessly cut a swath through Dominion space, the Borg would again and again be set upon by new Dominion forces. These new conscripted worlds added their intuition, cunning and all kinds of combative methods. The Borg's advancement would be brought to a halt for a time, but only for a time. It wouldn't be too long that the collective would finally find the interplexing beacon once again. After analysing the technology and determining that it was made by the Federation, they would then try to determine how it got there. With a new motivation, the Borg would once again push further into Dominion space, forcing the enemy forces back into their territory, continue to assimilate every world they would come across, utilising new projectile weapons that would detonate in the atmosphere of every world, spreading nanites throughout the populace, expediting the assimilation of these worlds and hastening the dominance over the Gamma Quadrant. Every attack and strategy the Founders could come up with would be thwarted by the Borg, bringing the Dominion to breaking point. Eventually the Borg would make their way to what was the Founders' homeworld. Finding it abandoned, the collective would begin scanning for warp trails, and when discovered, they would pursue their foe at maximum warp. Being pushed to the brink, the Founders would have no choice but to engage in one last effort to defeat their enemy. One last strategy which would not only possibly destroy the Borg, but themselves as well. They would make their way to their side of the wormhole which leads to the Alpha Quadrant. Knowing what awaits them on the other side, the Founders would hope that the minefield of self-replicating cloaked mines would annihilate both forces, for if they were going down, they weren't going down alone. As the fleet of cubes would gain on the Dominion fleet, orders would be given to delay the Borg at all costs before they would intercept the Dominion ships, preventing them from carrying out their plan. The bulk of the remaining Dominion fleet would fall back to engage the Borg, ramming the cubes with their fighters, releasing biogenic viruses within the cubes themselves, such as the Blight and any all methods they could use to slow them down with, as well as taking out a cube or two. Of course, this wouldn't delay the Borg too long. Continuing to follow the Dominion fleet, they would finally arrive at the wormhole, passing through, and with the Borg gaining on them and gaining on them and gaining on them, both fleets would finally emerge on the other side. Ready to meet their fate, the Dominion would fly straight into the minefield, followed by the Borg. Throughout the Bajoran sector, blinding flashes of light could be seen, as both fleets taking heavy damage. Ship after ship and cube after cube would be destroyed. Both fleets would be engulfed in an ever-replicating minefield. Both Dominion and Borg would continue firing on one another as the fleets would bit by bit diminish until the spectacle of multiple explosions and what would look like a magnificent display of flashing lights would dissipate and finally vanish. And whatever remnant of the Dominion forces that were stuck in the Alpha Quadrant during these events would inevitably have to surrender to the Alpha Quadrant powers. And who knows, maybe they'd even join with the Federation. And how that new alliance would face off against the Borg? Well, that's a subject for another video, I think. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to donate to my channel, you can donate to my PayPal, or consider becoming a channel patron. the links to which are both in the description below. Live long and prosper, my truckies, and until next time, here in the Continuum.